and he served in World War II in the U.S. Marine Corps. His highest rank was corporal, and he served in Parris Island, South Carolina, and Virginia from July 21st, 1944 to January 1st, 1947. This interview is taking place in Guilford, Connecticut, and my name's Leslie Coons, and Wallace's wife, Jackie, is here with us, his wife of 65 years. And this interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Now, just to begin, Mr. Kline, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
Okay. Where were you living at the time?
New Haven, Connecticut.
And why did you join?
Because I always wanted to be in the Marine Corps. And that was the only reason, really. Any
special reason it was the Marine Corps, that particular branch?
I liked the looks of Marines. The first Marines that I really saw were in their dress blues. And I was impressed about these two gentlemen who looked like they could handle any situation. And I found out later on that that was true. That was true. After I became a Marine, I was trained to handle any situation. Unfortunately, we were taught to kill, but that's what the war is all about. And we were not taught to wound anybody, because when you wounded somebody, even though it was the enemy, that meant you tied up a couple of our medics to take care of this wounded enemy. So the Marines are noted for killing their enemy and not wounding them. On the Pacific Island, they had several instances where some of the Marine prisoners, the Jap prisoners, were captured by hook or by crook, and so they had to be transported out to the main ship where they wanted to interrogate them, and maybe they could learn something about their strength on the island or their intent or whatever. And the Marine guards who took them out to the ship, when they got out to the ship in their Higgins boat, they didn't have any prisoners. And the officers would inquire, "Where are the prisoners?" And they said, "Sir, the prisoners tried to escape by jumping overboard, and we shot them so that they wouldn't drown."
Were you there when that happened? Or
no, I was not there. This is the way I was trained. And maybe I said the wrong thing, I don't know, but that's the way things were in the war. The Marines knew that when they were a prisoner of war, their quickest death was the beheading. Many Marines and Army and Navy were beheaded, but that was, as far as quickness was concerned, that was fortunate, because some of them were tortured before. It's just like we do and did at Guantanamo. I understand how that's done with, and it's the best way to go as far as I'm concerned. But in a certain way, you should not try to torture somebody who's willing to put a bomb on his back and blow himself up with 20 others, because there's no torture that he can recognize. But to get back to Marines, where was I?
If you could Talk about the first days. Once you had enlisted, what did you do from there?
The first day?
The first days, the beginning time. Yeah, what did you do?
Well, as all Marines know, we gathered together all across the country on trains, mostly steam trains, and then we all arrived at Paris Island at the same time. Like I say, there were 60 of us, more or less. And then we were put in what they called cattle cars. And I guess they were cattle cars. And the first thing we ever heard was, as we went through the gate into Paris Island, was, "You'll be sorry."
And who was saying that?
The guards who were at the gate, who had gone through the boot camp. But they weren't sorry, but will be sorry for a while. And do you want more of that day?
Well, were you ever sorry?
Well, yes, I was. Probably the first night after the day was over. The first night I was sorry. I was thinking, boy, why did I get into an outfit like this? And then I thought a while, and I said, hey, other guys have done it. If other guys have done it, I can do it. And the other guys did it, and I did it. And it wasn't too long after that when we were beating each other, and we were being beaten, and hey, after a while we got to like it. We could run, we never walked anywhere. I can say this much. We were there for 4 months, and we never walked any place. We either ran or marched. And the DIs who trained us, they ran or marched with us. They were able to do this, and they did it. And of course, we weren't too proficient at it in the beginning, but we saw other boots Marines going by in their platoons, and they were snappy, and they looked great. And we were still sort of keeping our left foot going and the right foot going, but it wasn't less than a week before we were just as good as they were.
Now you were there for 4 months. Approximately.
Well, 9 days in July and August, September, and October. Well, I guess it's 3 months. 3 months.
Okay, and where did you go from there? Do you remember?
I went home on a 10-day furlough to be with my wife.
And how long have you been married?
65 years and about 9 or 10 months.
So at that time, when you started boot camp, how long had you been married then?
Oh, from May 1943 until July 1944.
Okay. And then after the furlough, did you return back to Paris Island?
No, I went to Quantico, Virginia.
And how was that? Was that more boot camp?
The night I arrived in Quantico, I was taken out to the main station from the main base, and all by myself. And I went to the guard shack and registered there, and they told me to go up to the second deck.
You really want to know.
And in the Marine Corps, everything is like in the Navy. You have a deck, you have a ladder instead of stairs, and you have bulkheads instead of walls. And Well, that's what we went by. But anyhow, these two guards told me to go upstairs, and which is up the ladder,
Andy,
which I did.
what?
And the few guys who were there, they welcomed me and wanted to know if I could play cards, and I said yes, I could play cards. And they said, well, join us. So we played bridge, believe it or not. So anyway, while I was playing bridge with the other Marines that had been there for some time, I heard the loudspeaker says, Private Kline, report to the guard shack on the double. And on the double was repeated. So I ran on the double down the ladder and reported to the guard shack. And they said, you're going to be outdoors in guard duty. There's a truck full of radar equipment. And they handed me a 45 semi-automatic, and which I strapped around my waist. And they did not have to ask me if I knew how to handle this 45, because they knew I was trained to handle every small arm weapon that I could come in contact with. And the next day I was issued a 45 semi-automatic, which could be automatic, so 45 caliber machine gun. And I was issued that the next day. But anyhow, that first night, I walked around that radar thing, and I'm thinking to myself, this is a lot of, well, I can't say bull manure, but I says, who the hell can steal this radar here? The was on the east side of us was the Potomac River, and on the west side was the main station, and the north side was the Naval Hospital, and on the south side was the airport. So how is anybody going to get in here and steal this radar? But it was part of, even though I had gone through boot camp, I was still being trained, and I thought that was my duty. So I did it.
And what were you being trained for? What were you being trained to do?
Well, if you're talking about that the particular night, I was just trained to be a Marine, that's all. But I was fully trained to do what I was an expert in when I got there.
Okay, we're back now.
Okay. After I was taken to my job in the hangar, I should go over that again. When I was taken to my job in the hangar, where I was to work, it was full of Corsairs, F4U Corsairs. And I recognized them because I built them.
Those are airplanes?
Airplanes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what kind were they again?
Pardon?
What kind were they?
Fighter planes.
Okay.
Corsair.
Corsair? Okay. Go ahead.
Am I still on the air?
You are on.
Well, anyhow, I was so surprised to see all these airplanes. And there were other airplanes in there. They were torpedo bombers, and all these planes were not going to the war. They were going to be used to train Marine second lieutenants in their necessary maneuvers, and they used these planes. The Marine pilots and the Marine fighting Marines they taught the other forces how to work together. The Marines fighter planes in the F-4U Corsairs, when they were in combat, they learned that they could watch the Marines down there, and the Marines would make arrows out of bed sheets pointing to where the enemy was. Because the Marines, when they came over 400 miles an hour, they couldn't hardly see anything, but they could see these big arrows. And they would come down and they would strafe the Japs and drop bombs on them, and making sure they didn't drop them on the Marines because they were within sight of each other. And this is one thing that the Corsairs were used at Quantico, but to train these second lieutenants.
You said that you recognized the Corsairs because you had built them. Can you explain that a little bit?
The Corsairs that I built were when I worked for Sikorsky's. I started at Sikorsky's in 1940 when Igor Sikorsky was my boss, actually. And I would see him in the morning when he reported to work, after I did, and I would say, "Good morning, sir," and he would turn to me and he would say, "Good morning," and he would walk through my department, which was the wing department, to his hangar where he was building the helicopter. And I was instrumental in this helicopter because I was required to make some parts for it. I have no idea what the parts were, where they went, other than they went on the helicopter. There wasn't too much of the helicopter, but it's a bunch of tubing and an engine, but they were instruments that had to be covered, I suppose. But anyway, then as the war progressed, and Igor Sikorsky convinced the Army and the Navy that the helicopter would be useful in the war effort, and they agreed, and I watched him demonstrate this fact to the Army and the Navy.
Was that in Stratford?
In Stratford.
Okay.
That's right. No, it was in, well, actually, it was in Bridgeport. It was at the,
okay.
But it was in the original place. And so anyhow, then...
Do you remember how he demonstrated it?
Oh, yes. I watched every minute of it. And I don't remember whether he actually flew it or his other person actually flew it, but they were the only two people in the world who knew how to fly a helicopter. So I've seen him fly it many times, and he wears his Hamburg hat, and he could fly. He could design anything. And what they did, they took these large boxes that engine parts were shipped into anywhere in the world, and they stacked them up to make like an enclosure, like a garage, and with no roof on it. But the front end was all open, and the sides were all closed. So they flew this helicopter over to this enclosure, and the brass of the military watched them. They flew this helicopter, and they were not as easy to fly as an airplane is. The helicopters were unknown quantity in those days, but these two men were experts at it. So they actually flew the helicopter into this enclosure and flew it out, backing it out, and then they maneuvered this helicopter around in circles and what have you, and then they brought it back in front of the brass, and a mechanic came out with a steel ruler, and he measured from the speed, the pitot speed indicator. He measured until the helicopter was at 6 foot. And then someone said, take it up 1 inch. And you could see the helicopter move, but very slowly. And they measured it again, and it was 6 foot 1 inch.
Wow.
And that's what the Army Navy was looking for.
Do you remember? Go ahead.
But now, Igor did not invent the helicopter to fight a war with. He invented it to save lives, civilian lives. And it was demonstrated in the Naugatuck and Derby Valley in 1955 during the Hurricane Diane. They saved hundreds and hundreds of people stranded on their rooftops and floating down the river in their cars. And this is what Igor Sikorsky had in mind. But and the same thing he also built while I was there working for him. We built these S-44s. They were large, amphibious civilian transports. And that they were called the China Clippers. And they could fly from United States to Hawaii, or to United States to China, and they could land on the water. And they would have been helpful in the Second World War, because when we needed somebody in Hawaii, we had to transport them in a B-17. That's about the only thing they could, or B-24 or 5. They were the only things that could fly that distance, but they were not passenger planes. They were warplanes, and they were the most uncomfortable planes to ride in, especially if they had all their armament on there. So these 3 hulls that they had outdoors waiting for the wings to be put on, I heard, but I can't verify it, I heard there were scraps for the aluminum that was in them. And, well, that's what happened to those.
Now, Mr. Kline, can you tell us what you did, as far as after the boot camp? Where did you go from there, and what did you do?
The first day, when I was taken to the hangar and saw all these planes, and then I was looking at the Marines, and they had civilians in there working on them. And what they were doing is repairing them. And I couldn't wait to get my hands on them. So anyway,
This was the Corsairs.
Well, I also worked on dive bombers,
Okay.
any kind of a warplane, or Piper Cubs. I used to make windshields out of plexiglass for Piper Cubs, because the pilots that ran these observation planes, or rather flew them, I think they were frustrated fighter pilots, and they tried to fly them like it was a fighter plane. And when they landed them, they used to bring them down with such a thump that they would crack the windshields. And eventually, when the war ended, and they couldn't get any more windshields, but they still had the fighter planes. And I had time on my hands, and I also could work with plexiglass, and I made the windshields for these Piper Cubs. And to do that, I had to get the carpenter shop to make me a mold, and I had to use the oven in there, and but I did all that.
So back to when you saw the airplanes in the hangar, you couldn't wait to start working on them. How long was it till that's what you began to do?
The next day, I was taken to the hangar, introduced to my master sergeant, and I found out that he was in our conversation that he was from Hartford, Connecticut, and of course I was from New Haven, Connecticut, so we were bonded already, besides being Marines, and we had just gone through the fire in the Barnum and Bailey Circus in Hartford, and this master sergeant, he lost his sister in that fire, and I believe that was in July. I'm not sure, but anyhow, so he gave the kid the tools, and says, well, here they are. This is what we're doing. And what I was told to do was take a stabilizer off of an airplane. It was taken off by someone else, and I was to feel the metal on the stabilizer and to see if it had any oil can effect. Oil can effect is if you push it down, it snaps up. And anybody knows when they squirt oil on something, the old-fashioned way. So he says, when you find one section like that, then you make a patch and you rivet it underneath, because fighter planes can have nothing sticking out. They have to be smooth. All rivets for fighter planes have to be smooth. And
why is that?
For bombers, well, for speed. If you have rivets sticking out all over, like the bombers do, the bombers had rivets sticking out, but they weren't for speed. They were for distance. And the slower you went, the further you could go. Whereas the fighter plane, if you went faster, then you were restricted to how long you could be up there, but you got there quicker. So it was just logical. Anyhow, so I started, and when I fixed one of these dimples...
How would you fix it? What would you patch it with?
Well, I patched it with a piece of aluminum, and sometimes if it wasn't near a access door, those were little round doors to get inside to do some work in there, and you had to make it to the size that would go through the door, because it was on the other side, and then you had to drill holes through there, and you had to make sure you didn't drill something else, and then half of the time you had to work with a mirror, like a dentist does, and I knew how to do that because I repaired airplanes when I worked for Transport. But when you work with a mirror and you think you want to go to the right, you have to go to the left, and that takes you to the right. And I was told that I first learned that was when I was taught to be an instructor in Transport, how to train people. You don't train people in movements that have them facing you, because they'll get it backwards. We used hand drills a lot, and when it was required, and they would be turning it the wrong way, so it wouldn't work.
You said that was in Transport. What was that?
Transport. That's where the F4Us were built.
Okay.
They weren't built in Sikorsky's.
Okay.
That was another interesting, if you want me to go into interesting things. When I first went to Sikorsky, we had a marker plate thing that we made. Everyone made their own. And it had a S and wings on it. And it was the same size as the marker plate. So then when Igor got involved with bought Sikorsky, we had to throw away all those. Now, there's a lot of man hours wasted and women hours wasted. And we had to make another marker sticker with a V and an S and wings on it. So that was all right. So then, when Sikorsky moved out altogether, he moved to where he is now in Stratford, and I have been invited to go over there, and I can bring anyone I want to bring, and we'll have a personal tour of the whole factory. And I have the card in my wallet of the young man who, do you want that too?
You have it in your wallet?
Oh, yeah.
Sure, you can put it on the
Everything.
camera.
Oh, no, I don't have it on.
Oh, that's okay.
I gotta stand up to get my other.